In today's Wheelbarrow Series class, we're going to talk about hummingbird gardening. First off, the hummingbird is the smallest species of bird in the world. It is capable of hovering and flying backwards, and it's also the only avian species that can fly upside down and backwards. There are only one species of hummingbird that lives east of the Mississippi River, and that is the ruby throat. The male ruby throat weighs about 3.3 grams, or about as much as just 2.5 paper clips. Very tiny little creatures. Few fascinating facts about hummingbirds is they can routinely cruise about 27 miles per hour, and they can reach up to 60 miles per hour when mating. One interesting thing about mating is they actually mate while flying, so they can mate flying 60 miles an hour. Wings beat normally at 53 times per second. Has little or no song. They usually attract mates with a flashy flight and with the red throat display. So the males will have the red throat and the females will have the green. One female ruby throat can eat about 2,000 insects a day. Many people think that other bird species eat a lot of mosquitoes. Actually, the species that eats the most mosquitoes for us is the hummingbird because they can actually catch them. Many people think martins eat a lot of mosquitoes, but they actually don't. They're not adept enough to catch most of the mosquitoes, whereas the little tiny fast hummingbird can actually catch them. The hummingbird uses the insects as its protein source, and then flower nectar is its carb sources. So you can see they fly really fast. Their wings flutter really fast, so they need a lot of food to keep that high metabolism going. The ruby throat often migrates up to 500 miles in a single day. You can see in the picture here, based on the year where they end up and by the time they get to us. They have to eat about 100% of its body weight in nectar just to survive. And then they'll feed every 5 minutes or an hour based on the timing and the food and how active they are. They also cannot smell. They find food by sight alone, which is kind of interesting considering that they also use sight like we do to see things, but that red throat of the male is also how it attracts its mate. So their eyesight is quite well, and they see colors really well. The ruby throat generally arrives in Kentucky by mid-April. Some of the earliest reports in some years. There are some that show up as early as mid-March. Some of the favorite early spring foods that include nectar that they'll hit are our native irises, pinks, columbines, and phlox. Mating takes place in May, and then the young arrive in June. So it is May now, mid-May, so they're probably mating, and then egg laying will take place, and then we'll have babies in June. Females actually build a nest and rear their young, and you can see the tiny little nest there. They're usually maybe as big as a half a tennis ball. They're a small little nest because these are tiny little birds. This is just a close-up picture of a male ruby throat, and you can see that red throat there, the feathers on the throat there, which is what he uses to attract a mate. So the ruby throats do migrate. And by late July, migration southward actually begins, but those would be the birds that fly the furthest north, all the way up into Michigan. By the time July gets here, they'll start um, migrating on south again. And then later in the summer, our hummingbirds will start migrating south as well. Overwintering takes place in Mexico and the Caribbean islands, so you can see that they really do fly a long distance each season. The hummingbirds feed on the falling while moving south. Catchfly, dragonhead, cardinal flower, monkey flower, foxgloves, gay feather. Those are just some natives. There's a lot of just about any plant you put in your garden that has a tubular flower on it, they're going to hit. Males live about 2.5 years, while females live about 3.5 years. That shorter lifespan is probably due to the fighting of the males over territory and mating. And then over 50%, get this, over 50% of each year's young won't live 1 year. So they have a very high death rate. So it's very important for us to keep food out for them, feeders, and make sure they have a good habitat. As far as attracting hummingbirds, if you feed them, they will come. You need to put your feeders out early though, so you can catch the ones that are migrating through, and they'll stop off and maybe spend the summer with you. You need to put those out by mid-April. One male will defend each feeder successfully, and you can see in the picture there that there's one male and several females. He would still kind of chase those around, but not like he would with other males. The more feeders you put out, the more hummingbirds you will have, because again, one male can just defend one feeder at a time because he just doesn't have enough time to keep the rest of them away. If you put feeders out of sight of each other, that's also better, because then the males won't notice other males maybe defending a feeder here and there, and you'll just get more birds in an area that way. Also, don't put any fruit or anything close to your feeders, because then you'll get gnats, and the gnats are small enough they can actually get into the feeder and kind of contaminate the water. As far as buying a feeder, you want to buy feeders that have a red uh, flower look to them, or the flower part where the hummingbird is to eat. Hummingbirds are attracted to red because they see the same wavelength as we do, and bees see purple, blues, and ultraviolets more easily than red. Um, that way you'll get less bees on your feeder and more hummingbirds. Also, how do we know that red flowers were for birds? Well, go back to the way bees see. Bees don't see red well. If a flower develops naturally, if it's red, it's looking for birds to pollinate it. As far as the nectar, there's no need to buy hummingbird nectar. You can make it yourself very easily. It's a very basic recipe. It's just 4 parts water to 1 part sugar. Don't mix it any stronger than that. The birds don't want it any stronger than that. What we're trying to do is just match what the sugar content would be in nectar in the flour. First off, you're just going to boil your water, get it hot and boiling, and add the sugar to it for 2 minutes. Do this on the stove top. Don't do it on the microwave. Do it on the stove top. You're going to have a mess probably. Let the solution cool. You can either let it cool at room temperature or let it cool in the refrigerator. I usually let it just cool at room temperature. And then you can just add it to your feeder. Do not, I repeat, do not add any dye to your hummingbird nectar. That red dye is not good for them. I know some of the store-bought stuff has red dye in it. Over time, that is not good for the hummingbird, just like a lot of dyes are not good for us. And you don't need it, because they're not coming to the glass part of the feeder. They're coming to that red part down where they're going to feed, thinking that that may be a flower for them to eat off of. So again, don't buy hummingbird nectar. It's easy to make. It's cheaper to make yourself, and you also that way you can avoid those red dyes. Sometimes you're going to need to clean your feeder. You need to clean it weekly, or even every time you change the nectar or add new nectar to it. Basically, all you need to do is just wash it with a mild soap, rinse it with a bleach, and then rinse it thoroughly with water. So I would just wash it, hand wash it with some regular old dish soap. If you can find unscented, that's good, but it's not imperative, because again, we're going to bleach that off. Rinse it good. Rinse it in a 10% bleach solution. I wouldn't put pure bleach on it, because it'd be hard to get that rinsed off. And then let it rinse really good with water and drain it, and then go ahead and fill it up. Now you can also take your feeder apart and run it through the dishwasher if you would like. It wouldn't hurt a thing. As far as insect control, we do have some issues, especially with ants getting into the feeders, which actually get into it and end up floating inside of the feeder itself. Um, a big thing is for bees is if bees are coming to your feeder, there's a couple things you can do. Bees do not like the nectar mix as well for hummingbirds as it would if it was stronger. But even if they find it, maybe it's a hot, dry year and they're just looking for water and for nectar, and they start hitting your hummingbird feeder. If you want to slow that down, put up another feeder that has a much stronger solution um, of nectar, maybe double, and the bees will go to that, because the sweeter the better for the honeybees. But for the birds, they will not go there because it's too sweet and they won't like it. For ants, you can create a moat, and some of the feeders come with this little moat, maybe a little plastic ball like this. You can make your own here. Basically, it's just a cut tin can, your little metal washer, and a rubber ring there, and you put water in it, and that way the ants, when they climb up the hook and back down, they can't get to your feeder because of the water. You could also just take some petroleum jelly and rub it on whatever your feeder's hanging from, maybe the wire itself it's hanging from it, or even if you've got it hanging out on a shepherd's hook, just put a little petroleum jelly on that shepherd's hook, and then the ants can't cross that barrier because they'll get stuck, and that way you can keep those little varmints from getting it in your feeder. Hummingbirds do need a habitat, and I know they can fly, but if you've got the habitat that they need closer by, they're going to be a lot happier. They do need water, believe it or not. They don't just drink nectar and eat insects. They do need regular water, so a bird bath is good. You want to make sure you keep fresh water in that bird bath. Don't let it get too dirty. The other birds will be happy as well. Hummingbirds will drink from that same water as the other birds. As far as flowers, the more the better. We're going to talk about a few here in a minute, but the more variety you've got, the happier your hummingbirds are going to be, the happier that your pollinators are going to be as well. Trees around close by, not too close, but close by, good for resting. Uh, they also like sunny and shady areas, just like any other living creature. They get hot or cool, so they need some protection. And then one thing about hummingbirds is they don't like to feel enclosed. So maybe if you live in town and you've got a lot of trees and a lot of buildings around you, they're not going to be as happy, and they may not stick around as they would out if you live more in the country where they've got some open areas to fly. You imagine as fast as they fly, they're going to need open areas. So now we're going to talk about some plants or plant families that are really good for hummingbirds, and what is easy for you to plant in your garden, and you'll have some natural nectar sources for your hummingbirds. Here we have the mint family. There's a lot of different plants in the mint family. Generally, how do you tell if a plant is in the mint family? Well, it has a square stem. If you look carefully at all three of these plants here, their stems, they're actually square, not round. Salvia there on the left, there's different varieties of salvia as well out on the market. This is the old-fashioned, also known as scarlet sage. Hummingbirds love those long tubular flowers because of the nectar they give off. Also, if you look closely, the ants do too. And then we've got bee balm there in the middle, and those tubular flowers there, they keep pushing out. Hummingbirds love it. Again, they love red. And then hyssop there. Hyssop is always is a pollinator favorite. It's also a favorite of hummingbirds, and you can see the little tubular flowers. Again, these are just some examples in the mint family, but there's a lot more than that, even actual mint. But the hummingbirds will hit all of these. Again, they're going to go for the purples, the reds, those types of flowers first. Another plant that hummingbirds really love are honeysuckles. There's several types of honeysuckles. You can see in the background photo there, that's our wild or native honeysuckle. But the honeysuckle that they really love that you can plant is actually a cultivar. In the picture there, that is Major Wheeler. It has long tubular shaped red flowers. The hummingbirds absolutely adore this plant. There's a lot of nectar in it. It's a really nice plant to plant on the trellis at the end of the porch or something. That way you can enjoy the hummingbirds coming up really close. And we have the columbines on the left. There's the wild columbine that you'll see in a lot of gardens around here. Notice it has the red and the yellow flower. That red attracts hummingbirds. And you can also plant the cultivated varieties there on the right, and you get multiple colors in those, just about whatever color you want. But just remember, the reds and the purples, pinks are going to be more of what the hummingbirds are going to stop by most often. Here we have the Campsis family, which is actually the trumpet creeper, and trumpet creeper is a native vine here in Kentucky. Usually you'll see it in that middle picture there, that orange flower color, but you can also get other cultivars now. You can get a yellow one there on the left, which again, the orange is going to be more popular, but the hummingbirds eventually will find that one and go to the yellow one too. And then on the right there, that one's called Mango, and that one's got, it's kind of a cross between the yellow and the orange, and it's got a nice yellow flower with a red throat, which is kind of pretty as well. You do need a sturdy trellis for trumpet creeper because they can grow quite large and woody. Bignonia family is actually cross vine. Looks very similar, or the blooms are very similar looking to the trumpet creeper. It is a large vine as well, and you can see there on the left, it's a nice flower. It's yellow and pinkish orange, and then we have the orange flowers on the right. It's a nice vine as well. Hummingbirds love it. Again, give it a nice sturdy trellis to grow on. Penstemons, there's several penstemons on the market in multiple colors. A lot of variety in these. They all grow up and have those tubular flowers there on the tops of the stems. This one here is Midnight Masquerade. It was one that we had at the prenatal class this year. I really like it because you have those nice purple flowers and you have that darker purplish foliage, which gives you a little interest in the garden whenever it's not in flower. Lobelias or cardinal flower, the native there on the left is the cardinal flower, which hummingbirds absolutely adore this plant. It's not a huge plant, maybe 2 feet, 3 feet tall at the max for the native variety there on the left. And then the cultivated species there is on the right. That one comes in red and blue. It blooms a little longer than the native cardinal flower does. It also is a much larger plant. It can get up to 4 feet tall by the end of its bloom cycle. Here we have the mallow family. We have hollyhock there on the left. The single flowers are going to be best. The double flowers don't work well for hummingbirds because they can't get into the nectar as well. So go for the single flowers. Outhouse mix is a good mix if you want mixed hollyhocks that are single. There in the middle is the hardy hibiscus. The hardy hibiscus has come a long way in the last 20 or 30 years. Lots of new colors, lots of new foliage colors and textures. That one's beautiful there in the middle picture there with that dark purpley foliage and those bright red flowers. Hummingbirds will love that plant. And then also with the hardy hibiscus is the new varieties are sterile, so you don't get seedlings everywhere. If anybody's ever grown the native or the wild species or the older cultivars, they actually will produce seeds. And if you don't deadhead those seeds off of there, you'll end up with a lot of hibiscus seedlings or weeds, if you want to call them that, all over the garden. And then there on the right is the Rose of Sharon. Again, make sure you pick a single variety, which is going to be best for the hummingbirds. But also pick a newer variety that is sterile, so you don't have, like you would with the older hardy hibiscus, a lot of seedlings everywhere. Because if you let those Rose of Sharon seed, you will have a lot of weeding to do to get those out of there. This is a nice plant if you've got a shady area, maybe under a porch or even under some shade trees. Makes a really great plant for a hanging basket. This is fuchsia. It's also known as lipstick plant. It's not hardy. It is an annual. You can buy it at a lot of the garden centers, but it blooms all summer. Those large tubular flowers there you can see in the picture. Comes in multiple colors, but I think this red with the purple center is probably the hummingbird's favorite. It's just a gorgeous plant. It blooms all summer. It's nice to have around. If you've got a spot for it, you might want to try check this plant out. It is usually relatively cheap. You can probably get a full hanging basket for 15 or 20 bucks. Ipomea family or morning glories. We have the cypress vine there on the left, which hummingbirds adore this plant. It has tubular red little star-shaped flowers on it all summer. We have the regular morning glory there in the middle, but you can get multiple colors. And you know that in any of these morning glory families, if you let them seed, which you're going to have no choice, they're going to seed on you, especially cypress vine and morning glory. Just keep that in mind to plant them somewhere where you can not have to weed it regularly. So you wouldn't want to put this in the middle of a flower bed because next year you're going to be fighting morning glories on your other plants. We can also do moon vine there on the right. Moon vine does open later in the evening, but it's not before hummingbirds are still active. So when it opens, the hummingbirds can get to it. The moon vine there is a tropical, well, these are all tropical. It rarely seeds itself back. It's not like the cypress vine and the morning glory. Usually, if you want to keep that plant, you need to save seeds on it and replant each season. A few other favorites, we have the buckeye there. The bottom left picture of the white flowers is our native buckeye flowers, which they will hit those. And there on the upper picture there is the red buckeye, which is actually a large shrub, small tree. It has beautiful long scapes of red tubular flowers, which hummingbirds love. In the middle there's clethra, that also known as summer sweet, is really a sweet smelling plant. When it's in flower in the spring, the bees and butterflies and things will be all over it, as well as hummingbirds will. And then there on the right, if you're looking more for a woodland, small tree, the Carolina silver bell, easy for me to say, it's also a good option. We do have native azaleas and rhododendrons here in Kentucky, usually more for Eastern Kentucky, but if you want to go ahead and plant some of those here, just make sure you do your soil test, get your pH right. They do like a low pH, which would be down in the 5 area, and an acidic pH. You'll need to keep it there if you want them to be healthy, but these will grow in part sun quite well. Our native azaleas are deciduous azaleas, which means they lose their leaves each season. And they'll come out in these bright orange flowers in the spring when the hummingbirds are coming through, and they'll really love those. As you can see, those flowers, long tubular flowers with the make really looks almost like a honeysuckle flower, I think, but the hummingbirds will hit these quite readily as well whenever they come in. A few more favorites. Weigela there on the left is a flowering shrub. They've made some strides in it in the last few years. The new varieties actually will bloom multiple times during the summer, which is a great addition to your perennial beds or your shrub border. The Nicotiana there in the middle, there's several varieties of that. That's actually flowering tobacco. You can get flowering tobacco that'll grow anywhere from a foot tall to 6 feet tall. Depends on what varieties you want. These all have a really nice fragrance in this evening. So when the sun starts to go down, they release that fragrance, which smells heavenly. But you can see those flowers there. The hummingbirds love it. You may ever grown even field tobacco. When we used to top it, the hummingbirds were always all over those flowers while we were out there until we broke all the flowers out. And then we have the zinnia there in the middle, even though that's a double flower. The zinnias or the hummingbirds like those plants, and you can get those in multiple shapes, sizes, and colors as well. You can get multiple plantings on those a season as well, and you'll have fresh zinnias always. You'll frost. And then on the right, there's the Mexican sunflower, as you can see in the picture there. It is native to Mexico, which is where the hummingbirds overwinter. So they're used to that plant whenever they're down south. And then if you plant in your garden, they'll come to it quite readily because they remember that plant. Snapdragons on the left there. It's kind of an older variety of plant, but you know, things come into vogue and go out. It'll probably be back here again soon. But you can get those in bedding plants, the smaller dwarf types. You can get some taller types as well. It is semi-hardy. Some years it will actually overwinter in the soil and come back, especially if you have the taller varieties. In the middle there we have obedient plant, and you can see how many tubular flowers it has on it each day. It's another great plant for hummingbirds. And then foxgloves on the right there, which is a biennial, but every other year you'll have beautiful flowers on a plant. But you know, 1 year it's going to be just foliage, and then the next season you're going to have flowers. And then one of my favorite plants, favorite tall annuals is Cleome there on the left picture there. Hummingbirds love this plant. It'll bloom, probably starts in June and goes all the way into a hard frost. Does put out a lot of seeds. I would let them seed readily if I was you, and you can just pull up what you don't want and leave a few in the garden each season. This variety here is the variety that uh, the older variety, which is not a solid color. You get a two-tone flower on it. A lot of the new varieties are solid whites, solid pinks, and solid purples, solid salmon. This one is got the two-tone color on it. I don't know that I've ever seen this one actually sold on the market, but I'm sure it's out there. It's an old heirloom variety. I'm sure it's out there. But I have planted it with the other solid colors, and usually over time, I guess they cross-pollinate, and most of them come back to this two-toned color, unless you've got just the individual colors planted. And then there on the right is the canna, and you can see those large red flowers. Hummingbirds wouldn't be able to pass those up. They would be stopping on those quite readily as well. So if you have any questions, you can call me at the Washington County Extension Office at 859-336-7741. Happy hummingbird gardening.